Hello, everyone out there in the Puget Sound community. This is Luke Poole from Career and Employment Services. Today, as part of our Ask a Logger series, we're joined by Kenji Lee, who is a biochemistry and mathematics major from the class of 2015. Kenji is currently a PhD student and teaching fellow at Boston University at Massachusetts. Prior to this, Kenji earned his master's in applied math at UW Seattle and worked for 4 years at the Allen Institute for Brain Science. So thanks for joining us, Kenji.
Yeah, sure.
Questions. So could you start by describing your research and the institution where you're studying?
Yeah, so I attend a PhD program in neuroscience through the psychology and brain science department at Boston University, and that's in Boston, Massachusetts. And so my research is looking at how decision-making occurs and how, an organism is able to translate sensory evidence into a decision. So looking at that process of translation of sensory information to decision-making process, and then to actually a motor action that is meant to be accomplished to kind of accomplish some goal. So in my research, we do electrophysiological recording. So we're sticking an electrical probe into the brain, and we're monitoring how the subject incorporates this evidence that's on the screen. It's kind of like an iPad game, reaches out, does some movement, and then looking at how that process unfolds across hundreds of milliseconds in the brain. This has applications towards neuroprosthetic development, but also just for basic understanding of how decision-making happens at the neuronal level.
Really cool. Awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
So how did you get into this line of research?
Yeah, so I've always known for a long time that I wanted to do neuroscience back when I was a junior in high school. And I decided on UPS because they did have a neuroscience program that was starting in my first year. So I decided on UPS, and that kind of built my interest. And ever since then, I've been working in a neuroscience lab at UPS for 4 years. And then after that, I went on to work for the Allen Institute for Brain Science for another 3 or 4 years before applying to a PhD program. So I've always just kind of been interested in the brain, how it works in health and how it works in disease, and what can be done to help those that have injuries such as traumatic brain injury or stroke or are paraplegic or quadriplegic.
So you've had a good idea for some time, like with what you wanted out of your trajectory, and it's just been a series of refinements over the years.
Yeah, exactly. I think I've been very lucky and fortunate to have found neuroscience so early and to have had so much initial interest that has not just carried me through, but has been able to grow. And I think, that was a good point, is like I've always kind of narrowed and refined my interests rather than kind of meandering. And that's not true of everything or of everyone. So I feel like very lucky in that regard, and very lucky that UPS had a program to help me kind of refine that as well.
I began in pre-vet myself, then found clinical psych, and then in my super senior year, jumped to the decision to go into student affairs. So yeah. Envious.
Yeah, those are all really important. And, I love working with students too. So I'm a little bit envious of you. Like, I work with my model organisms, but, maybe they're a little bit more unruly than students, but I do miss connecting with undergraduates.
So what advice would you give to current students or recent graduates that are thinking about grad school or academia?
Yeah, I think one of the best pieces of advice is, if you're looking to do academia, if you want to do a PhD, know that it's a life decision. It's not something to be taken lightly. And I always advise students to take a few years off. I think 2 to 4 years is a good amount of time, because you want to be very certain that you want to spend 6 years of, they call it the prime of your life. I don't really think of it as the prime anymore, but you are in your 20s. And so like making sure that you would want to spend that time working long hours, you have to make sure that you love research and you love what you're about to head into, because academia is not an easy career. It's about 6 years to do that PhD, and about another if you want to be an academic, you want to be a professor, it's another 4 to 8 to do your postdoc. And then if you get a faculty position, which is not everyone, it's the vast minority only get a faculty position. And then that life is also very busy as well. So you have to truly know what you're getting into and truly love what you're doing. At a liberal arts school, you get to do hands-on research, but I think, getting an opportunity to go to a big university after college can be very helpful. So I almost advise to nobody that they should start a PhD program right away, unless maybe you grew up around academics or you had already worked during the summers at a big university.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that that context. Nice, that's good.
Yeah.
You've touched a couple times on kind of the Puget Sound experience and making yourself ready and getting the experiences for this decision. What was something you wish you did as an undergrad to kind of prepare for life after graduation, master's and beyond, that you didn't do?
Something that I wish I did was I wish I had taken it a little bit easier on the side of academics and focused a lot more on my research, because I always knew I wanted to do research, and I was really, doing these two difficult majors at the same time, and that kind of hurt my GPA. But what really matters when you're an undergraduate, if you're looking for PhD programs, is the quality of your research. And at a place like UPS, because it's small research groups and the professors are there to help you do research instead of you do research for them, there's a lot of opportunity to really do your own project from start to finish and get, they call it a first authorship, which is, you did the most work for this paper and you submitted. And that's like an outstanding achievement for a student going into a PhD program, because usually PhD programs they're training you to get a first authorship. So if you're able to do that early, which I think you can do at a place like UPS that you can't do at a big university, I think that's a big opportunity. I probably wouldn't have double majored unless I was doing very well in one, like above a 3.8. Because in the end, when you're applying for schools, they get hundreds of applicants for each, for about 10 positions. And they're going to look at these metrics like your GPA, and they're really going to filter based upon that. So even if you have to take easier classes, there's nothing wrong with that either.
So, follow-up question: where do graduate placement exams fit into that kind of stratification of importance?
Yeah. I think that is rapidly changing. So any advice that was given a few years ago is obsolete, and any advice I give now will be obsolete in a few years. But so the main exam for PhD programs in the sciences is the GRE, the Graduate Records Examination. I think that's what it stands for. But approximately, when I applied, maybe about 10 to 20% of schools did not require it. I think this year it might be up to 50, and I don't see it continuing in the future. And this is the GRE general exam. If you're listening to this and you're an applicant for maybe psych or physics, there are GRE subject exams that I know that are still, I think, required, if not strongly suggested. But in those contexts, that can help you stand out if you have a weaker GPA. But if you're applying to a neuroscience program which doesn't have a subject-specific exam, you just want to take it if the schools that you want to apply to require it. But you also want to take it such that it's just a bar to hop over. So you kind of want to be, for most programs, above the 70 or 80th percentile. Below that, you kind of will get filtered out, is what I've heard. So you just want to pass that bar and make sure you focus on the quality of your application in other regards. So, yeah.
So once you've exceeded that threshold, everything else is gravy. You can invest your energy elsewhere.
Yeah, and that might be my opinion, but I think it is generally the consensus in neuroscience and a lot of biology.
So shifting gears, obviously we're in the middle of a pandemic, and that's affecting, really, I think, many industry that isn't being impacted right now. How do you see COVID-19 affecting your field and affecting graduate programs?
Yeah, obviously that's a very difficult question to answer. The most immediate impact is all research has stopped. but something that would affect recent graduates or soon to graduate graduates, is a lot of endowments are tied up in the market, and the market just took a 30, I don't know, it was about a 33% hit. So what that means is the list is up to 250 as of today, which I believe is April 8th, and that will probably rise. And so all of these institutions have instituted hiring freezes, which means a lot of research associates positions are no longer available. People even that have gotten offers have gotten those rescinded. Even faculty that have gotten offers for like tenure track positions have been rescinded. And the time horizon for a lot of these freezes extends to the next fiscal year. So it's going to be about June 2021 for a lot of these programs. So it's going to be a very difficult time to apply because nobody knows what their financial situation will be in a few weeks, months for the next year. So nobody wants to commit to hiring anyone. Hopefully that will change soon. I know also the funding environment. So this is an election year, and that could be because the budget is year to year. So that could change drastically depending on who the next president is and what their administration priorities are. I think if you're interested in virology, now is like an excellent time. But we'll see if that is an across the board thing about science that we're going to get more funding, because it could very well be the opposite. So a little bit difficult. I don't know if I have any specific advice, but those are just things to keep in mind. I say networking is what's going to get you a job most now, because there's just so much demand.
Yeah. How does networking look for academic programs as opposed to industry positions?
Yeah, I'd say it's similar in a lot of ways. It's you go to conferences, you meet people, word of mouth, your friends introduce you to their other friends. But I think unlike industry is at least once you're going into science, in my subfield of neuroscience and systems neuroscience, it's a very small field. So it's a lot about the who's, like who do you know. There definitely is an inner circle of neuroscience. So what networking can look like is when you go to a conference, it is very difficult to go up to somebody and talk to them. But, you go up to somebody at their poster, maybe they're a student, maybe they're a postdoc, and just ask them about their work, ask them about their lab and things like that, and ask if you can, maybe later on in the conference, like get coffee. What I did was before this big, there's a big 35,000 person neuroscience conference that happens every year. And I looked at all the abstracts, and this is when I was applying to grad schools. I looked at all the professors, and I tracked down, okay, which professors had their name on an abstract, who was going to show up. And these are the programs I wanted to apply to. So I emailed them all a few months ahead and said, hey, I'm interested in applying. I would love to rotate through your lab if I was given an acceptance. And I tracked them all down. So pretty much for the entire week-long conference, I was just tracking down professors one after another. I probably met with about a dozen, and then met about 6 more spontaneously. So it's just kind of going out of your way. It is definitely a little bit scary, but it comes with practice. But definitely take the initiative to, these people are all nice people. They all kind of want to help you, and they all love to talk about their own work. So networking is pretty easy.
We're all vain creatures at our core.
Yeah. I think scientists are even more vain, because to sell your science and to get money, you have to say, and you actually really have to believe that what you're doing is truly important and, frankly, more important than other people's work.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So what kind of talked about, this networking, this strategizing that you did,
Yeah.
Prepare for graduate school. What factors really influence your decision for choosing a graduate program?
Yeah, so there's a lot of nuance, and applying to graduate school is such a weird thing because it's such an art form and something that if you're successful, you only do once. But a lot of times that success, you don't really get feedback, because if you got in, you got in. It's not like you have to apply again. But generally, from what I've heard from my friends that have done a really good job, choosing a grad program starts with the mentors that are there. you might think of a program as like, wow, that's really excellent. That place is Yale. Like, I want to do computational neuroscience. But if you don't know anything that happens at Yale, you wouldn't know that that's a terrible place to do computational work because they don't have many computational or any computational neuroscientists. So you really have to look at the research areas and the professors. And if you're kind of in that community, if you kind of know the who's who, uh, really figuring out whether these are good mentors or not. Because the thing about science is these scientists, they're selected for their ability to do research and to put out good papers. And then at the very end, when they get a professorship, they're thrust into a position that is less so about research and is more so about mentoring, about managing really a small business, which is your lab. So a lot of them, are okay at it. Some of them are excellent, and some of them are really terrible at it. So it's really, you have to know that this person is going to be a good mentor. This person knows how to run a lab, that knows how to run personnel, um, and is also doing research that you could at least, be interested in for a few years. So it really starts with the person and the people there.
So how do you tactfully find out those kind of interpersonal pieces?
Yeah, and that's obviously very difficult. It comes with having been in the community for a while. I was very lucky at the Allen Institute. There are about 100 PhDs there, and they're all doing neuroscience. So any lab that I wanted to hear about, I could find somebody to ask that had been in that lab or knows people in that lab. And so you kind of just have to make a space for yourself and then keep pushing on that. I would say, it's a little bit difficult coming from a liberal arts school, but a lot of scientists also came from liberal arts schools and they know how difficult it was. So they really will go to bat for you. So I remember when I got hired, one of the big scientists there was really helpful because she went to Barnard, which is another liberal arts college. And so she really kind of advocated for me and kind of like mentored me in a way because to like help me enter that field. So it's just about, meeting that right person that understands your experience. And then it kind of sets a lot of things in motion, but you always have to keep pushing on it. You can never be discouraged if you talk to somebody and maybe they can't really help you, or like you look around and you see all these other people that are like working under these famous scientists. It's just a lot of persistence, I think, and a lot of extending yourself into places that you might feel uncomfortable, and you just have to trust that these are nice people and that they'll want to help you without trying to come off as being impudent. So yeah.
So that's kind of the conclusion of my questions for you. Do you have any parting thoughts or things you'd like to touch on?
I guess I'm always available, so Luke can give out my email. But I think the biggest thing in science is it's not about how smart you are, which is what I've seen. You do have to always work hard, but you have to be, I think, the most important factor is to be resilient. Like, you have to apply for these things. The numbers are so terrifying. So to get into a lot of, my program, or it was, I think they admitted less than 5% of applicants, and you have to deal with that. And then you have to deal with failure. So I got rejected from 12 out of 14 schools that I applied to, I think. And then, every grant I've applied for so far, it's been about 3 or 4 I've gotten rejected from. And those have funding lines. So they'll fund below 5 or 15% for the least selective ones and below 5% for the more selective ones. Some of them even less than 1%. So you just have to be able to do these things and be kind of resilient and to kind of relish in the process of applying. And you can celebrate your successes, but you can't be too taken. You can grieve for a day on something you worked really hard on, but you have to be able to bounce back, because these numbers, they continue with you until, they continue with you your entire academic career. So, my PI, who's been super successful, went to Princeton, went to Stanford, but he struggles to write these grants because they fund so few of them. And so, he's already been in neuroscience for 25 years, or maybe like 20 years. So yeah, it's just resiliency and persistence, I think, are the most important traits of success in academic work.
Well, thanks everyone for watching this Ask a Logger with Kenji. If something in this interview has sparked a career interest for you, grad school, research, taking that break in between the two, come chat with us. You can visit pugetsound.edu/CES to schedule an appointment. Thank you again, Kenji, and goodbye.
Thank you.